Hello again, everyone. Welcome back for a little more chaos. We're in chapter 5 now. It's called Amnesia at the LA County Sheriff's Office. The first little section is called Keep Going. Thanks for joining me, by the way. Missed you guys. I know I haven't been as consistent lately, but it's a crazy time of the year for me, working out of school and with my kids' activities and also getting sick and the holidays. And so anyways, thanks for coming back for more. Okay, so the first little section is called Keep Going. The 30th anniversary of the Tate LaBianca murders passed with no story, at least not in premiere. That didn't worry me, not at first anyway. I knew that Jim Meigs, the magazine's editor-in-chief, shared my obsession. He started leaving the due date blank on the contracts I had to sign every month. A reporter's dream come true for a while. So wow, it's a month-to-month contract. That'd be tough I don't know. Maybe you make enough per month to not be worried about it, but it seems like I like a little more consistent income than that. I probably wouldn't be good at that. Within a year, I'd interviewed more than 500 people, movie industry players, friends and relatives of the victims, witnesses, journalists, cops, attorneys, judges, suspects, and hangers-on. My one-bedroom apartment in Venice had become a hoarder's nest of Manson ephemera. I'll post a picture. I posted it in the last one too, but isn't that crazy? His little one-bedroom apartment is just chock full of notebooks and binders and stuff. I don't know that I'd want all that kind of stuff around me like that, because I don't know if it's good for your psyche to have all that kind of stuff around you, dark stuff. I installed shelves above my desk to house a growing collection of books and binders. I bought the thickest ones I could find. They multiplied as they were breeding. When my friends visited, they'd stop in their tracks upon entering my apartment and cast worried glances my way. Probably thought he was cracking up a little bit, huh? Above my computer was a whiteboard with Manson circled in the center. Springing from his name like a psychedelic spider web were lines in erasable ink leading to associates of the family who'd never been publicly identified before, Hollywood drug dealers, and other names that had seldom been uttered in 3 decades. I tried to interview as many people as I could in a day, so my work days became endless. I think it'd be hard to find that many people in a day, but maybe not at that time anyways. I was always behind, needing to hop in my battered Acura to drive to the Valley or San Diego or Santa Barbara for an interview at a moment's notice. When I wasn't interviewing, I was researching, arranging my binders, or working the phones to set up more interviews. I basically adopted my neighbor's German Shepherd bully, who spent day and night at my house. I sometimes worried my files could be stolen, and I felt safer with the dog by my side. So is he getting a little paranoid, or has he seen enough stuff that's making him fear for his, maybe his own safety, but also the safety of his documents? I don't think they had, thumb drives at that time where you could save all that stuff and, put it in a safe deposit box or something. Maybe not, but maybe not as commonly as they are now. But this is, I think, the 90s he's talking about, so I don't think so. My magazine assignment was coming to feel like a vocation. Manson and the theories surrounding him were always on my mind, whether I was alone or with friends, though in the hopes of wrapping up the story, I was alone much of the time. Since Meigs was authorizing my extensions, he would visit me on trips to LA. We'd sit on the floor as I spread out documents for him to examine, kicking around various explanations for the discrepancies in the case. He was a reassuring presence. The things that seemed suspicious to me bothered him too. As long as I had his confidence, I could keep putting in long hours. At that point, the end, the break, the big scoop, seemed just around the corner. Looking from a document to a name on my whiteboard, James would nod and say, yes, I see, good, keep going. And I did. I often, I listen to authors being interviewed and stuff, when they have a new book coming out. And I always wonder, it says, it takes them 3 years. It took me 3 years to write this book, doing all the research and whatnot. What do they do in the meantime for income? I guess if you're a renowned author, it doesn't matter. You have sold previous books and you have that nest egg, but like before writers make it big, I wonder what they do, because you can't just spend all your time researching and writing with no money coming in. I guess unless you're, a trust fund maybe or something like that. I don't know. That'd be nice. I feel like I can write pretty well, but, you never know if your writing's going to be picked up or, I don't know. I'm just rambling, guys, but it does make me curious. Okay, the next section is called Political Piggy. The Tate LaBianca murders are etched into the public imagination. They are, in casual conversation, what people mean when they say the Manson murders. 2 nights of unhinged bloodshed that came out of nowhere. Now, I'm going to link below. I watched this thing. This channel is called Forgotten History. It's really good. I like it. They had an episode on Manson, and he was detailing like dozens, if not more, murders that were technically Manson murders. Maybe some of them were not proved, but suspected. But the Manson murders go well beyond these 2 famous, this little grouping of murders. So I found that pretty interesting in my research on this. I'll link that episode though, so you guys can watch it. I think if you're enjoying this, and I don't know if you can say enjoying this, but if you're finding this interesting, I think you'll like that too. All right, it's too often forgotten that the family had taken another life by then. Gary Hinman, 34, lived in a secluded house in Topanga Canyon, a hippie community about 15 miles south of the Spahn Ranch. A soft-spoken Buddhist and music teacher, Hinman had treated Manson and his followers with a dignity that few afforded them. I don't know, it sounds like there's all these secret people affording him dignity, famous people that didn't want to be associated with him later, let's just say. He hosted members of the family for long stays in his home, and he was generous when they needed food or money. And they killed him for it. Go figure. In July 1969, the increasingly agitated Manson was convinced that Hinman had just come into an inheritance of some $20,000. Seeing green, he ordered 3 of his followers, Bobby Beausoleil, Mary Bruner, and Susan Atkins, the last of whom would later participate in the Tate LaBianca murders, to seize Hinman's money by any means necessary. The 3 showed up at Hinman's on July 25th. Manson was wrong, he said. There was no inheritance, but they refused to take him at his word. If he's a Buddhist, don't they not want belongings? I don't know if money counts for that. They tied him up and ransacked the place, but there was no cash to be found. Manson decided to see for himself, coming over with Bruce Davis, another family member. But even Manson couldn't extract anything from Hinman. Finally, incensed, Manson drew a saber from his sheath on his belt and cut Hinman's ear in half. He and Davis left the house, but he told Beausoleil that the girls had to stay until they found the money. For 2 days, they battered and tortured Hinman, who insisted he had no inheritance. They also sewed up his severed ear using dental floss. Wow. By day 3, Manson had had enough. He wanted Hinman dead. Over the phone, he ordered his followers to take care of it. And they did. Just as Manson would do in the Tate LaBianca murders, he told his followers to leave signs implicating the Black Panthers. Now, I believe they put like a little paw print up on the wall and like kind of swirled it a little bit to where it looked like a paw, more than a hand. But I believe there were fingerprints left in that. So not the most, what's the word? I don't know. Not the smartest criminals around, I guess. They dipped a rag in Hinman's blood and smeared the words "political piggy" on the living room wall, surrounding it with bloody paw prints. Some of Hinman's friends grew concerned. On July 31st, not having heard from him in 6 days, they drove over to check on him. They found his body and called the cops. Charles Gunther and Paul Whitley, homicide detectives from the LA County Sheriff's Office, went to investigate. They spent 5 days searching the crime scene for evidence and conducting interviews. Although no one had seen or spoken to Hinman in the days before his body was discovered, it seemed that a woman had been in his house answering the phone during his captivity. I think that was Susan Atkins. At one point, when a friend of Hinman stopped by, she'd even answered his front door, holding a candle and explaining in a flimsy British accent that Hinman had gone to Colorado to see his parents. That's weird, holding a candle. The detectives issued an all-points bulletin for 2 vehicles missing from Hinman's driveway, a Fiat station wagon and a VW microbus. 7 days after the body was discovered, the Fiat turned up on the side of a highway in San Luis Obispo, 189 miles north of LA. Inside was Bobby Beausoleil, fast asleep. A state trooper took him into custody, and Gunther and Whitley hurried to question him. Beausoleil had concocted a story that blamed the Black Panthers for the murder, but he kept muddling the details. First, he said that he hadn't known Hinman at all. He bought the Fiat from a Black Panther a few days earlier. When the police told him that they'd found the murder weapon in the Fiat's tire well, he half confessed. Sure, he'd been in Hinman's house, but he hadn't killed the man. He and 2 women, neither of whom he would identify, had arrived at the house to find Hinman bloodied and beaten, complaining that a group of Black Panthers had robbed him. They stayed and nursed Hinman back to health. As a sign of gratitude, Hinman gave them the Fiat. Oh, that's pretty low there. But I guess if you're willing to murder, then you don't care how low you go. The murder, Beausoleil speculated, must have occurred after he and the girls left the house. Maybe the Panthers had returned seeking more money. So why was the knife in his car? He couldn't explain. I'm trying to picture how, I guess I don't know what is this, a Fiat? I don't know what year. I don't know how the wheel well works, but how do you hide a knife unless it's like, I think of like magnetized little key holders, but you think it would just fall out. I don't understand. He couldn't explain, nor could he say why he'd suddenly changed his story. Well, they say it's actually very difficult to lie. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember all the details you lied about, right? Gunther and Whitley were confident they'd found their man. They charged Beausoleil with first-degree murder and booked him into the LA County Jail on August 7th. I believe it's August 8th when the rest of the stuff goes down. It's the 8th or 9th. But they knew he had at least one accomplice, the girl who answered the phone and front door during Hinman's captivity. The next day, according to Bugliosi's narrative, Manson decided it was time to kick off Helter Skelter, his all-out race war. He ordered the Tate LaBianca murders, making sure again that his followers left signs at the crime scenes, implicating the Black Panthers. Anyone might wonder, how could the police fail to connect Hinman's murder to the Tate LaBianca killings, given their similarities? Yeah, just the writing and the specific words that they said, is that enough to link them? I don't know, but it seems, I feel like you would obviously make that connection, but maybe being on this side of it where we know more, maybe it wasn't as obvious at the time. If they had separate, detectives working on separate cases, they might not communicate. We kind of take for granted that everything's online now and you can search things and communicate a little differently than back at that time, for sure. It's a good question, and the official answer, even when I first read it in Helter Skelter, seemed like a stretch. Part of the problem was a simple matter of jurisdiction. The Hinman murder occurred outside the city limits of LA, so it was LA County Sheriff's case. The Tate LaBianca murders were handled by the LAPD. The 2 police forces didn't talk as much as you might expect. In fact, as Bugliosi tells it, it was their failure to communicate that led them to overlook Manson in the first place. By August 10th, the day after the LaBiancas had been murdered, Gunther and Whitley had connected Hinman's murder to Manson. They knew Bobby Beausoleil had spent time at the Spawn Ranch, living with a strange group under the control of an ex-con named Charlie. And according to Bugliosi, the 2 detectives did the right thing. They rushed to the county morgue, where autopsies of the Cielo Drive murder victims were underway, and they reported their suspicions to the LAPD. A sergeant named Jess Buckles heard them out. Wasn't it curious, they say, that both Hinman and the Tate murders involved brutal stabbings, plus some iteration of the word pig smeared in the victims' blood near their bodies? They explained that their suspect, Beausoleil, had been living out at an old movie ranch with a band of hippies led by a guy who claimed to be Jesus Christ. So you would think that if they were on that trail that they might be looking for other, like, that same MO, which the LaBianca murders kind of were. Their theory fell on deaf ears. Sergeant Buckles didn't see the connection, especially not if hippies were involved. They're all peace and love, right? He told the LASO detectives that they were barking up the wrong tree. The LAPD was already pretty sure that the Tate murders were a drug deal gone awry. Some pretty brutal way to take out your anger on a drug deal gone awry. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I've gone over the exact details, but it was very brutal. And so Bugliosi argued the LASO lead withered on the vine, and shoddy police work kept the Manson family at large for 4 months longer than they otherwise would have been. They weren't taken into custody until a pair of raids nabbed them on October 10th and 12th. Even then, their arrest was for stolen vehicles. The police wouldn't connect them to Tate LaBianca for more than another month. While they were at large, Manson and the family may have killed dozens more people, Bugliosi speculated. Once again, watch that forgotten history thing. I think it's interesting. In the official narrative, Manson had a lot of sheer dumb luck. Not only did he evade these early suspicions against him, he also survived ostensibly on a technicality, the largest police raid in the history of California. Okay, so if you read Helter Skelter, the raid for the auto theft, yeah, it was mentioned, but it didn't seem like it was a very big deal. But when you read this book, you'll be like, wait, what? That was very underplayed in Helter Skelter. On August 16th, 1969, LASO descended on the Spawn Ranch just past 6 in the morning as the sun was creeping up and most everyone was still asleep. So yeah, oh my gosh, I should drag out Helter Skelter and read how this is accounted for, because it's just like, yep, they were all arrested for auto theft and then released because the warrant, the date on the warrant wasn't correct. But this, they're saying, is the largest police raid in the history of California. I assume at that time, but not portrayed that way in Helter Skelter whatsoever. So just another kind of discrepancy. Yeah, more than 100 officers swarmed the property, led by the organization's elite SWAT team, armed with handguns, AR-15s, and tear gas, assisted by 2 helicopters, numerous ATVs, and a fleet of some 35 squad cars. That is a huge raid. Surrounding the ranch's 200 acres, they descended from 5 prearranged outposts with a show of force the likes of which no one in LASO had ever seen before. They arrested everyone in the family, 27 adults and 7 juveniles. They confiscated 7 stolen cars and a vast cache of weapons, including an automatic pistol and a submachine gun. One officer praised the raid's military precision, telling me it was the most flawlessly executed operation I'd ever been involved in. The raid had nothing to do with the murders. In the preceding weeks, deputies had been keeping the ranch under close surveillance, perhaps even sending undercover agents to investigate. They suspected that Manson was running an auto theft ring out of Spawn, stealing Volkswagens and converting them into dune buggies. It would seem like a coup, wouldn't it? Even if they had no knowledge of the murders, sheriffs had just picked up Manson and everyone involved with him on suspicion of crimes that were damning in their own right. Had the family been formally charged, they would have been sitting in jail already when the cops realized they were behind the killings. So had they been formally charged, which implies they were not formally charged. But the family wasn't charged. Despite the preponderance of evidence, the cars, the guns, the numerous sightings of Manson and his followers with stolen vehicles, the entire group was released 3 days after the raid, no questions asked. Once again, why? Why? When you start to get more into COINTELPRO and Operation Chaos, the FBI and CIA operations, you really start to think there's something to, like, why? Why were they just let go? Especially after they probably spent tens of thousands of dollars on that raid. I mean, it makes you scratch your head, right? Bugliosi explained it in Helter Skelter. They had been arrested on a misstated warrant. So you would think if you're choreographing a raid of that size, you'd make sure that your warrant was, correct. His book downplayed the size of the raid. You'd never know it was the biggest in the history of LA law enforcement at that time. He also took it as a given that Gunther and Whitley, seasoned and widely respected detectives, would back away from a lead to the most prominent unsolved murder case in California history. It seemed to me that they wouldn't do that unless they were told to. See, we gotta get our tinfoil hats on because the conspiracy's coming, guys. I wanted to get the story straight from Gunther and Whitley. What they told me was, at the very least, the story of an agonizing series of coincidences and near misses, a comedy of errors that had never been given a proper airing. At most, it was a germ of an extensive cover-up by LASO, which moved to conceal either its own ineptitude or something more sinister, the hand of a higher authority warning that pursuing Manson would come with steep consequences. So why is he so protected? We're going to find out. Well, we're going to be led to believe, or the circumstantial evidence will tell us something. Okay, the next section is called Leave a Sign. Paul Fitzgerald, the defense attorney, gave me Charlie Gunther's number. Gunther was the most honest cop he knew, and he'd taken the liberty of telling the retired detective about my research. Gunther had said he might be able to help me. When I got Gunther on the phone, he already knew what he wanted to tell me, but he refused to say it. I had to come to his house, he said, more than 100 miles away in Victorville, California. I tried to wrestle a hint out of him. Sounding exasperated, he said it had something to do with Bobby Beausoleil and maybe a call that had been made. After a pause, he added, and the destruction of evidence. The very next day, I made the 2-hour drive to Victorville. If you're driving from LA to Vegas, it's just about the last place to fill up your tank before you're surrounded by the endless vastness of the Mojave Desert. The town is an oasis of man-made lakes and sprawling golf clubs, all catering to the community's many retirees, among them Charlie Gunther, who welcomed me into his new condo. Gunther sank into a large recliner, though he was seldom relaxed enough to stay in it for long. Very nervous talking about all this again. Gunther was famous among true crime devotees. He became something of a staple in the genre, his skilled investigative work having solved a number of notable murders. Listening to him talk, I could see why Gunther was so highly regarded. But that day he was also nervous, jumpy. He wouldn't let me tape our conversation, saying that smart cops never allowed themselves to be recorded. As the words came spilling out of him, I tried to get his every utterance on paper while appearing nonchalant, lest he become even more inhibited. He remembered going to the Tate autopsies with his partner, Whitley, to tell the investigators about the similarities between the Hinman murder and the Tate murders. The coroner, Thomas Noguchi, had already reached the same conclusion. They must be connected. I know Charlie. I know. Okay, there's a lot of Charlies in this story, so he's talking about Charlie Gunther, not Charlie Manson. Noguchi told him, same knife, same wound, same blood on the wall. But the LAPD detectives weren't nearly as receptive, which makes you wonder why. Why? They don't even have a suspect at this point. Well, actually, I lied. They have Bobby Beausoleil. But why would they not want them linked if it was so obvious? They were convinced it had something to do with narcotics, Gunther said. I turned the conversation to Bobby Beausoleil. The mere mention of his name launched Gunther out of his recliner. He lies, and I can't tell you how I know that. Of course he lies, I said. Didn't all murderers? I mean, murderers, thieves, liars. What's a little lie if you're willing to murder, right? I mean, who cares? He called the ranch after he was arrested, Gunther said, pacing in front of me. To his mind, it was this phone call that had initiated the Tate LaBianca murders. That's interesting. The sole motive for these murders was to get Bobby out of jail. I'd heard this before. The copycat theory of the murders. Bugliosi had discredited it, I reminded him. The name didn't sit well with him either. It sounds like the name Bugliosi didn't sit well with a lot of people. "Arrogant son of a bitch," he shouted. Vince didn't want anything to do with the Hinman case. Hinman was a nothing case. Vince didn't want to prosecute it. Well, they did end up arresting Susan Atkins for the Hinman murder, and if not for her little jailhouse confession to another inmate, I don't know how it would have gone, because that's where they really tied things together. So Gunther didn't buy into the helter-skelter motive. He absolutely didn't, he said, sinking back into his recliner. He thought Bugliosi made up the motive to sell books. Well, it was a pretty good strategy because, once again, Helter Skelter was the most, even to this day, best-selling true crime novel ever. No one in law enforcement believed it either, he added. As soon as the family's Linda Kasabian flipped and became a prosecution witness, the entire motive for the murders changed. Gunther slouched in his chair, his great paw of a hand rubbing his forehead. When Beausoleil called the ranch from jail, according to Gunther, he said, "Tell Charlie I've been arrested for killing Hinman." Gunther was sure about this because there was a recording of Beausoleil's call, which probably went missing like a lot of other stuff. Knowing that he had accomplices in the Hinman murder, police had tapped the phone at the men's jail and recorded the calls he made. On August 8th, the day after he was booked, Beausoleil called the Spawn Ranch and told the person on the other end, allegedly Linda Kasabian, that he'd been arrested for Hinman's murder. "I need help," he was heard telling her. "Leave a sign." Which, they will leave a sign, but nobody seemed to care that it linked the cases together. That night, Sharon Tate and her friends were killed, and Susan Atkins scrawled the word "pig" in blood on the door of the Cielo house, just as she had done on the wall at Hinman's. Gunther believed this was the sign Beausoleil referred to. Atkins hoped to exonerate Beausoleil since he was in jail when the Tate LaBianca murders had taken place. Okay, so I could see maybe that being a motive why they didn't want to link the cases, because if they already had their guy for the other case, they probably didn't want to go back to square one trying to find the real killer. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? It's theory. Manson's followers were, in effect, imitating themselves on a more devastating scale just to free one of their own. After that, they could escape to the desert. Essentially, the wiretap was the best evidence yet for the copycat theory of the murders, and Gunther had never told anyone about it. Why, though? Why? He was visibly anxious to get it off his chest after 30 years, sometimes shaking in his seat. I wonder if these detectives are haunted by things they did or didn't do later in life. Like, man, that guy got off because I didn't think A, B, or C was important. But later on, they were like, oh, maybe that could have tipped the scales the other direction. I wonder about that. I don't know. Probably. I'm sure things haunt detectives. My brother-in-law's a detective. Maybe I'll ask him, although he's not a homicide detective. But he worried that it would overturn the verdicts against the convicted killers. Okay, so he knew that they had the conviction, so he didn't want to say anything because he didn't want to chance that being overturned. "I don't want this reversed after all these years," he said, pounding his fist on the arms of his chair. Gunther's intensity moved me. He seemed on the verge of tears, but I couldn't figure out why he decided to reveal the recordings now, after all these decades. And why to me? Well, I think the older you get, you look back on your life and think about the mistakes you made or regrets you have. It's probably just that stage of life where you're, trying to make amends for things in your past, maybe. I don't know. I asked if he had a copy of the tapes. No such luck. Because the wiretap was illegal, his commanding officer, Captain George Walsh, had ordered him and Whitley to turn over the recording. So if it was illegally obtained, it would have not been admissible in court anyways. So, I don't know. Maybe he shouldn't beat himself up too much, other than the fact that he did it illegally. If he maybe could have done it the right way, maybe. I don't know. Walsh apparently destroyed it, or made sure that someone else did. But if any of this was going into my premiere story, Gunther didn't want to go on the record alone about it. He needed someone else to say it with him. someone who could verify the tape's authenticity. Ideally, someone from the other side of law enforcement. He named Aaron Stovitz, who had been Bugliosi's co-prosecutor for part of the trial. Stovitz had heard the tape. Gunther was sure of that. The detective had brought it to him before it was destroyed. Get Stovitz to say it, he urged me, tears welling in his eyes again. Say Charlie Gunther gave me this reluctantly. Say I owned up after a long conversation and did it reluctantly. Ask him, how can it hurt? Promise me. I don't want them all back out on the street, and I'm worried this will do it. So it doesn't give a date. This is probably the 90s, so they're all still alive and well at that time. I promised him, but I still didn't understand why Walsh had destroyed the tape. Even if it were illegal, it so clearly solved the Tate LaBianca murders. The day after they occurred at that. He said it would eliminate the narcotics angle, Gunther told me. That startled me. Why would Walsh, who wasn't involved in the LAPD investigation, want them to pursue what he now knew was a false lead? Just so they could get him for the other murders? Doesn't make sense, but I guess that's the only thing I can think of. Unless it's a CIA or FBI thing, which it could be. Talking to Gunther reminded me of something in an old issue of Rolling Stone. Aaron Stovitz had given an interview to the magazine in June 1970, right before the trial started. He mentioned exactly the phone call that Gunther had just told me about, though he'd couched it in more uncertain terms. He's a pretty good journalist because, it's a random issue of Rolling Stone, and he remembers that this conversation was kind of offhandedly mentioned in it. But then again, he had a lot of notebooks and binders. Maybe he had jotted it down somewhere and it stuck in his mind. Using a pseudonym and speaking in the present tense, Stovitz told Rolling Stone that Bobby Beausoleil puts a phone call in at the ranch telling them that he was arrested there and telling them he hasn't said anything. Now, this is only a supposition on my part. I don't have any proof to support it. I suppose he, meaning Manson, said to himself, how am I going to help my friend Beausoleil out? By showing that the actual murder of Hinman is still at large. I guess it's a strategy. Didn't work. So I know that Melcher used to live in this house on Cielo Drive. Go out there, Watson, with these girls and commit robbery and kill anyone that you see. Don't forget to leave. Now, to me, that's taking a chance of even more family members being incarcerated for murder, which is exactly what happened. And Bobby Beausoleil did not get exonerated. So the whole thing blew up in their faces. And innocent people were murdered for no good reason. Don't forget to leave. And this is very important because in the Hinman case, they wrote political piggy in blood. He said, don't forget to leave a sign. Given that Gunther had used that exact phrase, leave a sign, I was almost sure that none of this was a mere supposition on Stovitz's part. But he never divulged how he knew about Beausoleil's phone call. Would he admit to having heard the tape? I doubted it. I'd interviewed Stovitz once already, and he was cagey. I think this case ruined so many people's lives. Not only the people that paid the ultimate price, but if you look at the attorneys and just the people that were sort of, adjacent to this, their lives were never the same after it. He said that he was always convinced that the Tate LaBianca murders were copycat crimes, but he wouldn't say why. When I'd asked him why the case wasn't prosecuted that way, he said it was because Bugliosi called the shots. And sure enough, when I paid him a second visit, Stovitz was even more aloof. He denied ever having heard the Beausoleil tape. He'd heard rumors of it, he conceded, but never from Gunther. He dismissed me with the message, tell Charlie Gunther, Mr. Stovitz has a great deal of faith in you, but unless you have some notes, it didn't happen. Now, I think that's true because you guys may have surmised that I'm a nurse. There's something in nursing that if you didn't chart it or document it, it didn't happen. Because say there is some kind of, court case, if you you did something, you did something right, but if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. Same thing, it's hard to prove that if you didn't do something and you did chart it, it's hard because, the documentation is everything. And that's what goes in court, what's documented, the proof, basically. I called Gunther and I could hear him wilt on the other end of the line. Is that how he wants it then? Let's just drop it. I was deflated too, just as easily as he'd given me the scoop. Gunther was prepared to take it back. You're just not going to be able to use it, he said. That's all. But the good thing about writing a book is you could still write about what they said, even though it's, not provable. You could say that I interviewed this person and this is what they said happened. Is it proof that it happened? No, but it's still someone's account of things, right? It's not the same as court. Court of public opinion, maybe, but that's it. As if to prove how thoroughly he'd given up, Gunther began to change his story. When I talked to him again 2 weeks later, he said that he'd neither seen nor heard the tape. He only knew of its existence. Exactly Stovitz's position. This was going to be a lot more difficult than I thought. I drove all the way to Vegas to speak to Gunther's former partner, Paul Whitley, whose demeanor was the polar opposite. Where Gunther would bound about the room, pacing and shaking and pleading, Whitley barely moved. He remembered the Beausoleil tape clearly. I heard it, yes, he told me. Something about leaving a sign. And he corroborated the story of Captain Walsh's infuriated response. Walsh was a by-the-book captain. He hit the roof. He hit the roof because they obtained it illegally, or because he was involved in the, what's it called, the San Francisco Project or something like that. I guess we'll probably never know. Like Gunther, his investigation had made him overwhelmingly confident of one thing. Helter Skelter didn't happen. So many veterans of this case, I noticed, were willing to say that the prosecutor had basically fabricated a motive, which is crazy because, once again, this happened in the 60s, and Helter Skelter is still billed as the official narrative up until this book came out. And it's like the more you talk about it, the sillier it sounds, like race war, going to live in a hole in the desert, like, unless you're just crazy or really messed up on drugs, who would ever think that that is a legit motive? I mean, I don't know. The more I read about it, the more it seems so far-fetched, Not a motive, Whitley said, but a philosophy. Bugliosi was well aware of this. He just didn't care. And he laughed all the way to the bank with the book sales, right? And that meant he didn't care about the subtleties of the Hinman case either, or about how LASO might go about prosecuting it. The Beausoleil wiretap was maybe the single biggest break I'd gotten at that point, but the stories around it had begun to multiply. Gunther would eventually allow me to use him as an on-the-record source, but his account muddied the waters more than it cleared them. Despite their bombshell evidence of a copycat motive, both he and Whitley insisted that they simply gave up after the LAPD told them to do so. Although they knew Beausoleil had an accomplice and that he'd called someone at the Spawn Ranch, they'd never even drove out there to question anybody. That didn't track, not with these guys. I mean, I don't know a lot of detectives, but it seems like, especially with the competitiveness you see between departments, and like you always see, like when the FBI comes in, the local cops are like, this is ours, get away. But department to department, I can't imagine a couple of detectives being like, oh, it's not that, just let it go. When you have your own investigation to do, you're going to follow every lead that you can find, right? It doesn't make sense that they would just be like, oh, they told us this isn't it. Okay, we'll just move on. I don't think so. Anyways, that is the end of the first third of chapter 5. It's a little bit longer of a chapter. I've been trying to cut the chapters in half, but this one's a little bit longer, so it'll be in thirds. But what do you guys think of that so far? I think it's interesting, the whole raid thing. If you guys want me to read a piece in Helter Skelter, let me know. Just how it's portrayed. That raid is portrayed as just a nothing burger really in Helter Skelter. But according to this, it was the biggest raid in California history up to that time, with ATVs, 35 squad cars, helicopters, SWAT teams. Is definitely not portrayed that way. So I think regardless of Bugliosi's intentions, good or bad, with writing it, he definitely doctored the story a little bit. I mean, I know when you write a book, you have, artistic license to write it however you want, but if it's supposedly a nonfiction book about, a true crime case, I don't think you have as much liberty to just leave things out, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm certainly not a lawyer. I'm not an author. So I don't know. Is that commonplace? I mean, I guess you have to fit a certain amount of information in a certain amount of pages. So maybe he didn't think it was that important, but to me, it just seems like, oh yeah, they all got arrested and released, when it was so much more than that. So once again, like they said in the last chapter, if he's lying about that, or, changing the narrative on it quite a bit, what else is he not telling the truth about, or did he not tell the truth about, or convince others to testify to? I don't know. Anyways, I hope you all are enjoying this. Like I said, I apologize for my very spotty episode releases. Yeah, it's coming up. There's only a couple weeks of the school year left. And so I'm not sure where I'm going to record these once my kids are out of school, and so am I. I'm going to have to get creative. So it might be a sketchy background. I don't know. We'll see. All right, you guys. Thanks again. I will see you next time. Also, thanks for all the subscribers, new subscribers. Even though not that many people are watching this series, I'm up to 850, which is unbelievable to me. I know most of it was from Ethel Kennedy and that wacky book, but I know this book isn't as juicy as that one, but I hope you guys are enjoying it. Like I said, I am rambling like crazy, but I missed you guys, and I will see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye.